The information provided is not a substitute for legal and other professional advice where the facts and circumstances warrant. People should always consult their own legal or other professional advisors and discuss the facts and circumstances that apply to their specific circumstances. The information shared on Ask the Landlord is for educational purposes only.
How are you doing today, Albert?
I'm good, Melissa. How are you?
Great. I am so good. And I have a question today that affects anyone looking to rent in New York City. So here's my question. Please tell us, when is the best time to look for a rental apartment in New York City?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm going to turn it back to you. What do you think is the busiest time of year for people looking for apartments?
I'm going to go with August and September, or July.
August and September are true. So they're usually around some life events or seasons, right? So usually people in New York City, right, or want to be in New York City for the summer. So it gets kind of busy around the springtime in preparation for June, July, and August, right? That's one season. Another season that is very busy, obviously, is people want to be set for their September school starting in New York City.
Right.
So that means that July, August are really busy months with respect to renting in the city, right? So those are so we just went through it, I guess. And then the months before that, I guess, like March or April through September are the months that there's the most people moving, right? So that's when demand is the highest. Okay? So when you're competing for a limited number of apartments, you want to put yourself in a situation where there's less demand so that you could get a better deal.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No one likes to move in the winter, but who cares? I mean, if you're looking for an apartment, you could probably get a better deal when landlords are more desperate and have less people after their apartments. Right? I mean, the pandemic notwithstanding, because that caused a different situation. But all things being equal in the normal circumstances, or typical years, people want to move around the times we suggested. I would say either before the summer, which is the spring, or before September, which is the summer. Okay. And if I was a renter trying to get a good deal, I would try to make a deal in the 6 months that aren't those times, which would mean, October to February would be the best deals. And really, I'm going to say this, obvious question or obvious statement. Not a people like to move around the end of the year around Christmas time. Like, people don't want to be moving in holidays time. Right.
Right. But it happens.
But it happens, but it happens to be a good time to rent because there's not a lot of people moving at that time. So, landlords are more inclined to accept less or give you more of a deal at that time. Now, do you have any questions about that? Because I'm going to build on that now.
I mean, my only question is, it's probably another whole episode, but can you negotiate a rental in the winter?
Yeah. So that was my next question. That was my next where I was going with that. So this is one of those, we had I think we had an earlier podcast on negotiating rent or things like that. So this is one of those instances where you can go back to your landlord when you're on renewal, and this is why a landlord would do like a 15-month lease or an 18-month lease or something, So it's in the landlord's interest to have the lease come due at the good parts of the year, right? Because of what we just said, right? So that they could easily rent it out again.
Right.
Okay. As opposed to your lease coming due in the down months of the year. So now given that information, you could use that strategically to your benefit. Can you think of some ideas there?
I mean, are they going to give me a month rent free? Like what am I
They
going to
might.
get out of that?
They might. Let's walk you through that, right? I encourage you, as I had before, to not make a request, right? Just a request, but to make an offer. And what I was giving you was the idea of what your landlord cares about and what's better for them, so that you could get what's good for you. So you might go to your landlord. Let's say your rent is expiring in December. And you say to your landlord, hey, first of all, it may be fine for you. And you might say your landlord wants to increase your rent. And you say, listen, why don't we keep it the same, right? But instead of signing a 12-month lease, I'll sign a 15-month lease so that my lease expires in March. So this way you got basically your rent to stay the same and the landlord got a better time of year for it to come up.
That is really valuable.
That is valuable, right?
That is really valuable for the renter's leverage.
That would be good. Or another thing is to say to the renter can say, my lease comes up in December. It's a great time to negotiate.
Right,
you go back to
especially if
landlord,
they're raising.
You go back to the landlord and you say, I'll pay more rent if you do this, this, and this for me. Or I'll keep my rent the same if you do this, this, and this for me. Those are fine conversations to have, and you're much better having them in the weaker time of the year. Now, one thing to think about from a I'm going to say there's two parts to this, and I've given this advice many times. So there's the renter's perspective, right? And the cost of moving and all that. And then there's the landlord's perspective, right? So it's important to understand when you're thinking about negotiating your lease at the lease up time, is that, let's say you move out of your apartment in December, right? So the landlord has to fix it, clean it, and then has to re-rent it in the worst time of year. So that's going to cost them how much time? Downtime. I mean, today's our downtime is very low, but still that's going to, let's figure, and then getting a new tenant, that's so it could be anywhere from 2 weeks to a month. Let's say it's a month between moving out, fixing the apartment, getting someone new to move in, a month. So that's 1 month of rent that it's going to cost the landlord to release your apartment, all things being equal. So when you're making a deal with your landlord, you could say, look, I realize that to release the apartment, you're going to have to, it's going to cost you money. Like, you're going to have to lose a month in between and fix it and all that, right? One of the things that you could also, but the landlord might say, well, I'm going to get more rent from that new person. And you say, wait a second, let's do the math on that. Let's say you're paying $2,000 a month, and the landlord says, well, I could get $2,200 from the next guy. Well, it's almost the same as losing a month if they don't have to lose a month. So it's not a big difference. So really, but of course there is a number that makes sense for the landlord to release to somebody else. But then you could come in with what's the best time of year? Maybe you do pay something, so you understand. And then from the tenant's perspective, you have the cost of moving, which is not cheap, right? You have to go and pay a security deposit. You have to pay the first month's rent. You have to pay the rent where you are, and it doesn't always line up perfectly. Like, you have to move out one day, you have to move into the next day, you have to advance money. You have, so those are expenses too that you as a renter have to incur to move. So, people, while you want your rent to stay the same or, go up a little bit, it's still going to cost you money to move. And people
Right.
don't realize that, right? And then, when you're confronted with such things, you're like, do I have a good relationship with my landlord? Am I happy with where I'm living? Those questions, I certainly make a difference for whether you're going to renew, and what the best time of year to look for an apartment is. Look, there's another part of that also. The question you were asking about when's the best time of year. Usually, landlords do try to have their apartments come available in the high times of year when their renters are looking. So on the one hand, where there tends to be more people looking and more demand in the competitive high seasons, there's also more supply usually. So one negative of shopping in the winter for an apartment is that you may not see supply that you would in the spring. But I find it still better to be looking in the winter because you'll have less competition. So
Right. And also moving expenses, like they'll be more readily available in the winter if it's not as competitive. So that's another positive.
correct.
Right.
So is that helpful?
Yeah. And just another question off of that though. So let's say I know this, I want to try to, start looking in, let's say December, January. I see an apartment I love. I have to act right away. Like I need to go see that. How long will it sit on the market?
In what time?
Like let's say I see an apartment that I like January 11th, right? How fast does one need to act as a renter in New York City?
Well, it depends. Obviously, the time of year goes into
Mm-hmm.
takes that in consideration. The price they're asking, the location, those things are all make a big difference as to, and where they're advertising it, if they're advertising it, things like that.
Right.
Recent times in New York City here, it's been a crazy, crazy market where there's a lot of demand and not enough supply. So, you've very often renters found themselves with, competitive, competitive situations on listings where, the thing went up for a day and the guy went to see it and there were 3 people bidding and they were all at full price and people had to go more than that. And, so this
For
goes back
rentals.
to, I think, what we said in earlier podcasts is, if you like something, be prepared to move quickly on it.
Right.
And you could still, that doesn't mean you can't get a good deal. It just means that, you want to be decisive. And, if you don't, that's fine. That's part of a strategy too. And you'll say, look, I have one of many options. Like we talked about a couple episodes ago, you want to create an auction where you're looking at a lot of options, and the more options you see, the better you'll be at buying something, and the more chances and choices, the more choices you could take.
Wow. All right, let's do another little question here. Do you foresee this market staying on trend how it is right now, as competitive as it is for renters?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of economic and political factors that go into it, where there's not enough supply and there's a lot of demand and there's a lot of people. The employment is very high, so people have jobs and money to pay for apartments. So, I think if that changes, you'll have less demand, possibly, which is to be expected, or prices might come down, as maybe costs come down, and if that does happen, if like a recession or something. What happens in New York most often is a long time is that there's really a limited supply of housing. And because of that overall, which we discussed in the prior episodes, that's really the driving factor behind the pricing mostly. And that a lot of people want to live here. So as long as those things still persist, I think that it's going to continue to be a very competitive place to, or expensive place to live. Unfortunately,
It is the greatest city in the world. So
yep,
that is for a reason.
if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere.
Absolutely. New York state of mind. All right. So that's really great advice. Thank you so much. So the best time to look would be, let's say, those winter months. But sometimes you can't control it. And you got to look whenever you're either, getting kicked out of your apartment or you want to change a scene, you get a new job. There's just always so many factors that go into play. But I think you gave us some valuable insight, some good renter leverage. So thank you so much.